Welcome to my keynote, The Paradox of Choice, and how to thrive in an industry with too many possibilities. I'm Azeria, and I'm the creator of Azeria Labs, and I'm also a trainer for reverse engineering and ARM exploitation, and I just love binary exploitation. But yeah, enough about me. Let's talk about what this keynote is not about. So this keynote is not another InfoSec rant. It's not about, oh, how fucked up the security industry is. It's not about, oh, we still have the same security issues that we had 20 years ago. I don't want to bore you with these things, because this is not why you are here. You are here because you work in security or in technology, and you're just very curious about and passionate about what you do. And you're here to meet new people, to meet like-minded people, to learn new things, and to get inspired, right? So this keynote is not about me. This keynote is not about security. This keynote is about you, because you are the most valuable asset that this security industry has. You are the people who analyze and fix problems. You are the people who break things to show that they can be broken. And you are the people who build new tools and also who defend the networks, right? So, and all of us are here to expand our knowledge in certain areas, to expand our skills, and to learn new things. So let's look at some of the security topics that we have here. So this is just a couple of the security topics that InfoSec has to offer. The reason why the security industry is so exciting is that you will never get bored. You always have something new and exciting to choose from, whether it is the offensive side, the defensive security side. But there is a lot of choices, perhaps a little bit too much, because once you have chosen a side, like offensive security or defensive security, the choices don't stop here. You will still need to choose stuff like, okay, let's say you have chosen offensive security. You still need to choose between something like penetration testing, reverse engineering, and binary exploitation. So many more choices. And even if you have chosen one of these fields, you still need to choose. For example, penetration testing has many different kinds of sub-areas that you can choose from. It's not always easy to know where to start and what to focus on first. So a lot of us have experienced something called a choice paralysis. And the choice paralysis is if you're presented with too many choices and all of a sudden you're totally overwhelmed by the possibilities, and then you're like, whoa, and you don't choose at all. It happens to all of us. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know the topic you want to focus on. But sometimes the resources that are available to you are just too overwhelming. You don't know, what kind of resources to focus on. So in this talk, I will go over some aspects of how to deal with the choice overload, of choosing what kind of resources to focus on, and also how to structure your decision making. You will also learn how to master a skill and just become a very efficient learner, and to do that with deep work. And last but not least, we will go over some deep work habits and some of the apps that I use to keep me focused and to not be distracted all the time. So yeah, let's start with the paradox of choice. Like, how do we choose? How do we choose better? So the internet is flooded with resources, right? With tutorials and blog posts and books and GitHub repositories, like everything. And most people are aware of the existence of the GitHub repository Awesome Hacking, which contains a lot of resources. Like for every single topic, you have links to books and material and blog posts, right? And even though many people are aware of its existence, the very same people are asking me, oh, Azeria, where do I start? Like, what should I be focusing on? There is so much out there and I don't know where to start. Like, what do I choose first? What do I choose second? I don't know what to do. So I was thinking about that from a psychological perspective. And, well, first of all, we tend to think that the more options we have, the better our decisions will be. But this is not true, because psychologists have discovered that if you give people more than 10 options for making a choice, they will make poor decisions. And even if they do choose, they will be less satisfied with their decision because they pick something and then will constantly think about the other options. Like, what if I had picked this one or that one? Maybe it would have been better. And this creates some kind of a frustrating feeling. So, and the level of dissatisfaction that you experience for making a choice depends on whether you are a maximizer or a satisfier. So let's look at a maximizer. Most of us are maximizers or have been once in our life. So what is the maximizer? The maximizer is someone who doesn't just want to have their needs satisfied. He or she just wants the best, like the best choice possible with the best outcome possible. If he looks at resources, he goes through every single option and tries to figure out which one is the best, right? So the maximizer overloads himself with a lot of options, and then he just gets confused. Like, he gets really frustrated because now that he's so overwhelmed by the complexity of all the options, he just doesn't know, like, which one is the best. Because the problem is, not all options are better than the other. Some are better in some way, and other options are better in another way. And neither is better than the other. So these people, like some of us, just experience a lot of regret with their choice. They think about like the other options and if they could have made a different choice. And here comes the paradox. So we tend to, if we are in a good mood, we tend to think better because we consider more possibilities and we see connections between pieces of information that we might have otherwise missed. But this is the paradox, because if we are a maximizer and we need to make a very complex decision which involves a lot of options with multiple features, this is a very complex decision and it induces in us negative emotions like being overwhelmed and frustrated, what the maximizer is doing. So this leads to poor choices. So what can we do about it? What if you are a maximizer? We have all been a maximizer once in our lives. So the alternative to the maximizer is the satisfier. Cool guy. He has requirements, he has criteria, he's in a good mood because he's still, he's not overwhelmed with all the choices yet. What the satisfier does is he looks at all the options, like option for option, one by one, and as soon as one option meets his requirement, he just stops looking. And he stops worrying about all the other possibilities. So, to satisfy just means to settle for good enough. What is good enough? It doesn't mean that you have to just choose any random thing, but you have to choose something that meets your criteria and then just let go. So the very first choice that you need to make is the goal between being a maximizer, who will likely regret his choices, or a satisfier, who will be much more satisfied with his choice. So let's look at a psychological explanation of how our brain chooses. So Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman came up with the peak-end effect. You might have heard of it. The peak-end effect is basically, it describes what we remember about the pleasurable quality of our experiences. So that means that what we remember about an experience is almost entirely determined by two things, which is how it felt when it was at their peak and how it felt when it was, when it ended. So, and it doesn't take into account the proportion of pleasure or displeasure of the experience, right? So, this peak-end rule is what our brain uses to summarize an experience. And these experiences, in turn, is what our brain relies on when choosing whether to have that experience again. So, whenever we make a choice, between what experience to have again, our brain looks at the summary of this memory. So, where can this go wrong? We all have experienced something called, a traumatic learning experience. Let's say you wanted to learn reverse engineering once. And you're like, okay, I'm so excited, reverse engineering is just the right thing for me. I'm very detail-oriented, and I'm very I love to solve puzzles, and reverse engineering is just the right thing for me. But you don't really care about the order of how you learn, or you don't have, a learning goal, and you also just choose any random resources. So what happens is you start reverse engineering, you start your first challenge, and then what happens is that you get stuck. And your lab environment doesn't work, and you see, assembly for the first time in your life, and you think oh my God, what the fuck? So then you just got really frustrated and you give up. So what does your brain actually remember about this experience? Well, a very unpleasant peak and a very frustrating end. And the problem with that is that next time someone asks you, hey, why don't you learn reverse engineering? Your brain will be like, reverse engineering is just not for me. I'm not good at it. It's just, I'm just not smart enough for this topic. But this is the thing. These memories are not accurate reflections of how you actually did feel, and also it can be easily bypassed. Which means that if you had chosen a more structured approach of learning the skill, your brain would have remembered it as something very pleasurable, and you would have thought, oh, reverse engineering is actually pretty cool, I should learn it further, right? So whenever you have this very unpleasant, traumatic learning experience, just think about, okay, why don't I just try to learn it again, but this time in a more structured approach. And this structured approach is what I want to be talking about today. So, first of all, the area that you choose, offensive security, defensive security, penetration testing, reverse engineering, this is all, very subjective to your needs. Do you like breaking things? Do you like writing exploits? Do you think you like, coding, right? So, is this a skill that you want to enhance your current job with? So these questions all have subjective answers, right? But here are some steps that you can take for choosing the right resources, right? To structure your learning once you have chosen, let's say, reverse engineering as your learning goal. So step number one is you choose your main goal. Your main goal is, for example, reverse engineering, because it's really exciting, I can tell you. So this is your main goal, and what you do is, oh, you can barely read this, I see, but I will just explain it to you. So you break down this main goal into small components. For example, what do you need to learn reverse engineering? You need assembly, you need some file formats, you need some operating system internals. You just split it in different components. And what you do next is that you evaluate the importance of each goal. For example, you should not skip the basics, Like a lot of malware analysts actually think that assembly is not that important. But you really need to go through the basics. So you need to structure the importance of your goals and prioritize them. So step number 3 would be that you need to array your options, which means you look at all the resources and you think, okay, now I have like all these resources. I pick them for each learning goal to learn assembly, to have the process of reverse engineering. So in the step number 4, well, that doesn't work. Just a second, they say. Oh, no, okay, perfect. Yes, and then you evaluate your resources. So you look at the resources that you have picked for each of your learning goals, and you're like, okay, how likely is this resource to help me actually achieve my learning goal, right? So if you think, oh, this is a very cool looking resource, but my goal is to actually learn assembly, and this is not going to help me achieve my learning goal, then you should just discard it. And step number 5 is just that you weed out the redundant resources, and then you pick the winning options. Now comes the process of mastery. How do you actually become an expert in your field? Like every one of us knows something. We all have some skills, but not many of us are actually real experts in what we are doing. And a lot of people think that you need to be like, that most experts are kind of like geniuses. Like our culture just loves the storyline of the prodigy, and experts are just geniuses. They have some natural talent or some, something like that. But researchers have long since denied that natural talent actually plays a big role in your success. That's actually not true. And when performance psychologists try to explore what separates experts from everyone else, then the single coherent answer was deliberate practice. It was just one form of practice that separates the expert from everyone else. So, let's look at the 3-step process of how to become an expert in your field, like a real expert. So this is when you actually want to master your field. And the first phase is the apprenticeship. In the apprenticeship, you learn a very wide range of skills that relate to your goal, right? So in this phase, you gain proficiency on a skill-by-skill basis, and you need to be very patient and not skip the basics. You actually need to stick to your goals. And this is also where you mirror techniques that already exist out there, right? So you find tutorials, and you're like, I'm going to replicate this. I'm going to try this out. So this is like the beginner phase. And here's some advice of how to go through this stage. So most importantly, you need to value learning over money and status, because your goal is to learn new skills and to gain knowledge. And you always have to keep in mind that the reward will outweigh the sacrifice eventually. Also, you always need to keep expanding your horizons, like you do right now. You're attending conferences, you meet new people, and you attend like hacker spaces or whatnot. Also revert to a feeling of inferiority, which means if you think that you already know something, like that you're already an expert, you just stop learning. And you always need to think of yourself as a beginner. Otherwise, you will stop learning. Also, you need to trust the process and avoid the easy path. Because a lot of people will tell you, oh, just read this tutorial, you will be the master of the skill. It's not true, don't listen to them. This process takes time if you want to do it right. Also, you need to embrace failure as a critical part of learning, because basically the way to mastery is basically just failing over and over again, right? And the second phase is is the creative phase, the creative active phase. This is where you take your skills that you have already learned in the previous phase and combine them in a creative way. This is where you develop your own style of doing things and your own, you develop your own techniques, your own tools. And this is where you can experiment and get very creative. And then the last stage is that you practice and practice what you have learned until you reach the state of mastery and actually become an expert in your field. So this whole process, I just realized that it's not very readable from up here. But so the whole process is just you enter this field with with a lot of excitement, but also fear. And also you're overwhelmed by all the resources that you're presented with. So you need to go over the first stage. You need to choose the right resources. You need to structure your learning goals. And then you arrive at the apprenticeship phase. You learn all the skills that you need, all the components. And don't take shortcuts. Don't skip the basics. I'm serious about that. And then you enter the creative active phase where you combine all your skills. And the next phase is something I will be talking about in the next chapter, where you use deliberate practice to then finally reach mastery. So, let's quickly talk about the power of deep work. I've already written an article about that, and a lot of people seem to like it. So, how do we actually get started? We all know the feeling that we are very excited to learn something new, but then we just don't know how to start. We are like, okay, I have chosen, my field, I have chosen my resources, but I just get distracted all the time. We all know that feeling, that we just wait for motivation to strike us out of nowhere. Like, boom, motivation, okay, let's get going. And then we just start learning, and then we get distracted all the time, like Twitter notifications, Facebook, like all these things. So the rule number one that you need to keep in mind is that in order to get motivated, the whole process starts with action. Action sparks inspiration, which sparks motivation, which leads to more action, and the loop continues. So it's totally in your control whether you get motivated or not. But it starts with action, it doesn't start with motivation. A lot of people get that wrong. But yet again, so we also have experienced something called flow. If we are really, really deeply focused on something and we forget all time, and we have the feeling that we have really control over the task, and everything seems to flow effortlessly. So this is what people call flow. But how do we actually reach the state of flow? Flow is something very productive. It's when you're very highly focused. The thing is that the rule of thumb says that you need approximately 25 minutes of undistracted focus in order to reach the state of flow. Now, when you look at this chart, that if you get distracted or check your notifications every 15 minutes, you just drop and you never reach that state of flow. It seems very harmless. It's like, oh, I'm just checking Twitter. It's just like 2 seconds, But it actually prevents you from reaching the state of flow. So, what you want to do is you want to remove all distractions. I will show you some apps at the end of this presentation. And if you're distraction-free, what you do is you do a 4-hour, for example, session. So you try to reach flow as soon as possible, or as efficiently as possible, and then you take a break. Very important, take a break. Don't overexhaust yourself. If you try to focus for 3 hours, your focus will decline. You need a break after approximately 1.5 hours. So you take a break, and then you start again, focus-free. This is where you reach your maximum productivity. This is where you get the most stuff done. I was actually surprised when I first started to implement deep work in my routine, how much stuff I actually got done. I thought okay, this is going to take me 8 hours. And then after 3 hours I was done because I was like, just highly focused. So, but doing lots of things in a visible manner doesn't mean that you're being productive. So you should not confuse productivity with busyness. Like shallow work, this is called shallow work, and shallow work is basically what the author Cal Newport, the author of the book Deep Work, describes as non-cognitively demanding logistical style tasks often performed while distracted. Checking emails, writing emails, like all these planning things. This is all shallow work. What is deep work? Deep work is basically professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive ability to their limits. And this is the state where you actually produce new value and improve your skills. So, another vocabulary, the difference between practice and deliberate practice. So practice is not equal to deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is a different kind of practice that actually stretches your mind to its limits. And it requires focused attention. It does not work alongside distraction, like not at all. And it is like performed with a goal of improving performance. Whereas practice is just like repeating something over and over again, right? Until the task just becomes mindless. So you're not really challenging yourself. So let's be straight here. Deliberate practice is not a very comfortable activity because you're constantly trying to challenge yourself every time like a little bit more. You need to pick challenges that are just slightly above your current skill level. Don't pick challenges that are too above your skill level because then you get frustrated and give up. Don't pick challenges that are at your skill level or below because you will get bored and it will not really help you to focus. So always try to pick something above your current skill level until you fail, because it's basically like lifting weights. You know that if you lift weights, you basically do it until you fail, right? You lift weights until you're like, okay, I can't anymore, and you have to take a break. But in that break, this is exactly where your body develops the strength to perform this activity again the next time. So this is exactly the same with the mind. Also, to make this all a little bit more pleasurable, just listen to music. I don't recommend like rap music or something like that. It doesn't really, just try to not have a voice in the back of your mind because it's also very distracting. Like what I recommend is listening to, for example, classical music or something, you know, upbeat without any voice lyrics. So, last but not least, is the power of habit. Like, how do you even implement all of this? Because this all sounds very logical, but only knowing this won't put you any closer to your goal. So this is the most important bit of this presentation. How do you actually implement this? So, from the book Deep Work, that I highly recommend, Cal Newport suggests 4 different habit strategies for deep work. So the first one is recommended if you're an author of a book, for example, the monastic one. This is what authors do when they just rent a cabin in the woods and then, you know, they just have distraction-free weeks or something. And then we have the journalistic method, which means that you just try to fit deep work into your schedule whenever you can. But this is not recommended for beginners because you first need to be accustomed to deep work so that you can just like dive right into it and be laser focused. The bimodal one is the most popular one that you can use if you have a full-time job, for example. So this is where you just dedicate a few days per week, let's say a weekend, to deep work. And remember, only do like 4 hours per day, and for example, on a weekend. And the rhythmic one is the one that I'm doing. That is, you implement deep work in your daily routine of 3 to 4 hours of deep work per day. It's the most effective one. So, but what if you don't want to master a skill? What if you just want to learn something and you're not really sure if you want to dedicate your life to that skill, right? You're curious about malware analysis or something like that. So, but you're not really sure if it's something for you. So you can give it a try, but a real try, with the 30-hour experiment. So, what you do, what I have here is, those are like 3 of those habit strategies and how long it will take you to reach your goal. So what you do is you pick a skill that you're curious about, and then you stick for it for 30 hours. And then you divide those 30 hours in 4 components, into 7 4-hour sessions. And then you pick your habit strategy. How much time do you have? Maybe you really don't have much time. Maybe you just have the weekends because you're very, very busy. Then it will take you approximately 3 weeks, but then you have already dedicated 30 hours of work into that skill, and you can already say that you know something about it. Or you say you do the rhythmic one, then you're done in 7 days. Or you do the journalistic one, which can take you 2 to 7 weeks. So it's up to you. And in the worst case, you figure out that this skill is not actually for you, but it doesn't matter because now you have already dedicated 30 hours to it and you learned something new. And in the best case, you think, oh, great, this is actually a really cool field, malware analysis or whatever, and then you just continue. So, here are some of my apps that I use to not get distracted. First of all, I have Trello as an app that helps me planning. For example, if I want to plan out those sessions, like what I want to learn, when I want to learn it, like what is the order and so on. So Trello is really cool, it creates your boards, and you can make to-do lists. My absolute favorite app is Forest. Like Forest is a very simple app. You basically plant trees. You tell your phone, okay, I want to be distraction-free for 60 minutes. And then you plant a tree. And what your phone does is, as soon as you want to check your notifications, your tree dies. And you don't want your tree to die. It has a psychological effect. So you're like, yeah, I can do another 5 minutes because I don't want my tree to die. And then you see your whole forest, and you're like, wow, look at all the focused hours that I put in. And no tree died. So it's kind of a fun game. And you always have the scale of your focus on, for example, a weekly basis, monthly, and yearly. And then there is something very new on iOS. I'm not sure if it's also available on Android, but it's called screen time. Because you kind of need to reduce, it's very shocking if you realize how much time you actually spend on social media. So with screen time, it's a built-in feature in iOS. It shows you how much time you actually spend in every app. And if you realize that you spend 5 hours on social media per day, then you're like, whoa, okay, I could have spent that time doing actually something really productive. So I always use screen time to limit apps like Twitter for 15 minutes per day, because Twitter is not actually that useful. So yeah. These topics that I just covered are just the basics of what is covered in these kind of books. So these are my favorite books if you want to learn about deep work, about mastering a skill, about the paradox of choice. And also I like the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, because it teaches you about priorities and what to focus on and what to not give a fuck about. So these are the books I recommend. Check them out if you want. And yeah, last but not least, you really need to enjoy your journey. If you are miserable on your current journey of what you do, then pick another game. Because this is basically all just a game. And the most important part of the game is the journey. Because you don't pick a video game and then you're like, oh yeah, this will be fun once I beat it. No. You play a game because you want it to be fun while you're playing it. So do this with your life as well. If you are currently working in penetration testing and you hate it, pick something different. There are so many things in this industry that you can learn, and you can become an expert in any of those. So yeah, thank you for your time. And that was my presentation.